Before we get started with this video, let's take a moment to appreciate my new t-shirt. What a classic. Bloodsport, one of the greatest movies ever made. Love it. But my wife calls it the Kumite t-shirt because she's obviously uncultured. I thought I'd make a video about horror games. Now, I ain't into horror games, but I ain't against them. I'm completely neutral on the subject. If a game's good and it grips me, I'll play it, whether it's horror or not. As the days are getting darker, my seasonal habits are kicking in. So right now, I'd usually be a few seasons into my yearly run of watching The Office. But in this case, this year, I've started my first ever proper watch of The X-Files as a big grown boy, because when I was little, The X-Files, I was a bit scared of it, and I think it was just mainly the theme tune that I was petrified of. But I'm currently going through my first proper watch of it right now. I'm really enjoying it. And as a Supernatural fan, it's crazy how similar and the familiarities that it shares across both. It's great, it's excellent. The Office will have to wait till I roll credits on The X-Files.
Take 2 of these and call me in the morning.
Which might be some time, because I think there's like 14 seasons and a few films. Between watching The X-Files, I'll be watching my go-to films as well for this time of year. So we're talking Ghostbusters, Shaun of the Dead, like Sleepy Hollow, Tim Burton film, great. Haunted House with Marlon Wayans, funny as hell. I know it sounds really cheesy as well, like Hubie Halloween. It come out like 4 years ago. It's an Adam Sandler film, but who doesn't love Adam Sandler? He's funny. Mostly comedies, but with horror overtones. I'll be doing the same at Christmas time as well. I'll be watching my go-to Christmas films like Rocky IV and Die Hard. And it crosses over to games too. Obviously, it's not year on year my habits playing horror games, because a 30-hour playthrough of a game is a bit different to a 2-hour movie. But I do have my go-to games in the horror genre. So whereas in the recent years we had like Dead Space remake, 7 Days to Die, Until Dawn, Dead Island's made a comeback, I've given them all a pass, and I don't feel like I'm missing out at all. Dead Space has just recently dropped on PlayStation Plus, so I don't have to spend any extra money on it, so I might give it a go now. I'm not so bothered about the multiplayer aspect, hence leaving like 7 Days to Die and that in the background. My go-to horror games, my kind of habitual ones that I revisit every so often, are coming up. Just gonna record the next bit now. Naughty Dog, they can whack a story together. We're 11 years into this franchise, The Last of Us. We've seen it on the PS3, a year later, remastered on the PS4, because that's how long you need to wait for a remaster. But you know, where there's money to be made, they're gonna make it. I am currently playing through the one on the PS5 at the moment. It's so good, it's so well written that it makes the end of the world interesting. It's not about like the core, well, it is about the cordyceps now, but it's not about the creatures that can kill you. It's humans surviving against humans in this post-apocalyptic world. Once you finish the first game, you're Team Joel, Team Ellie. Halfway through the second game, you're even more solidified in being Team Joel, Team Ellie. Then you switch and you start playing as the bad guy. You start playing as Abby in the second one, and you start sympathizing with Abby and her crew. You go through all these emotions, but it's so well written that it's very much needed. We need a third one, and of course it's literal when we mean let them cook, because like I say, we've had 2 games in 11 years. Whether it's another 2 or 3 years before we see The Last of Us Part 3, it will be worth it. Moving on to my next game. My next game was in my top 10 last year, and I've got it over 3 platforms. I've got it on PC, I've got it on Switch, and more recently I've got it on the PlayStation. I am talking about Vampire Survivors. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it's a like Castlevania-ish roguelike bullet hell retro graphics with a banging soundtrack that will cost you free over the Queen's English pounds, or £1.69 if you are a PlayStation Plus subscriber, or it'll set you back about £6 if you want the main game and all the DLC. It's full of secrets, it's full of lore, it's deep for such a cheap game. It's like you're killing 10,000 creatures in a half an hour span on your roguelike run. You're picking your weapons, you're evolving your weapons, but it's like a mini strategy card game that you're playing at the same time, because you have to pick out the certain neutral items that evolve your weapons and what's effective against the enemies. It's just so good for the price. Buy it. Buy it now. And this game isn't because it's a Halloween themed game. This is actually just a regular game in my day-to-day anyway. Like, if I feel like I ain't got anything to play, it's nice and easy to pick up and play a game. My next set of games are a trilogy. No, they're not a trilogy. I mean, there's 3 of them, but it starts 2, 3 and 4. So I'm talking about the Resident Evil remakes. Now, these are very worthy remakes for new gen consoles. And the reason why I love these games so much. So growing up, Resident Evil 2 was my favourite until 4 came out on the GameCube. One of the really annoying things about playing on the GameCube was you couldn't walk and shoot. But if you go back and play like Resident Evil 1, 2 and 3 on the PlayStation, they're great games. The nostalgia is there, but how did we cope with them controls back then, man? It's like, I get it, like when the PS1 came out, there was no analog stick. So, and obviously limitations of the console, and then obviously we got the analog sticks, but the games were still made in the same limitations. So Resi 1, 2 and 3 were still very awkward controls until we got to 4, which was better with the PS2, the GameCube. But then we've got these new remakes, modern controls, and what's so good about these remakes, there's no gimmicks, there's no frills, it's just ground up, proper, true to form remake. There's a few tasteful DLCs here or there, but it's not, they don't ruin the experience. And one of the best things about this, Resident Evil 2 and 3 came out, they weren't full price, they weren't like 60 quid games. I believe Resi 4 was, but it didn't even last that long. I think I picked up Resident Evil 4 PS5 last year for like 35 quid, Black Friday, and one of my top 10 games of last year too. I'm not trying to throw shade on games that we grew up on, of course I loved them and I would not change them for the world, but I think there are classics from back then that today have aged like milk due to their controls and limitations of the console. Like naming like Super Mario 64, GoldenEye. If you play that on the Switch now, they didn't do anything to change the controls and it doesn't do very well, but the Xbox version, they changed the controls and apparently it was very good. Tomb Raider is another example. It just is very frustrating, but that's because of the limitations. But that's what we endured as children and I'd still never change it. The Luigi's Mansion trilogy. Now, Luigi's Mansion was a very regular go-to for me, especially when the GameCube was my mainstay, it was my main console. But it was really strange where they put the second game on the 3DS and they didn't put it on the Wii U. It was weird how they prioritised the handheld over the main console. They probably already know it was not a very good console and it was going down the pan, but it would have been good to utilise that game deck for Luigi's Mansion 2. I've got it on the 3DS, I never finished the 3DS, I got some way into it, but the controls weren't great, it was a bit clunky. They've now since ported it over to the Switch and it's a great port, like they've given it some good treatment, it is nice looking. Downside of it is it's first party Nintendo, so it is a full price game even though it came out like 12 years ago. At least Luigi's Mansion 3 was released on the right console and worth every penny as well, being a first party Nintendo game, because I've not had to rebuy it, not for at least another 10 years anyway until they do the remaster of this one. It's a fresh game even though we know Luigi's Mansion to be a puzzle game with haunted mansions or hotels or whatnot. You're used to it, you get the introduction of Luigi this time, which is a whole new dynamic to solve the puzzles in the game. It's well worth it. I've played it a few times over now. I probably will do again. Plus Luigi is the better brother anyway, let's face it. Apart from in Smash Brothers, he ain't as good as Mario at all. One of my all-time favourite platformers on one of my all-time favourite consoles, Pugsley's Scavenger Hunt on the Super Nintendo. Now this game is mega fun, mega difficult, classically unforgiving. If you die, you're back at the beginning, you lose all progress, you've only got 3 lives. Never completed the game. Even just hearing the audio effects, the soundtrack brings back a lot of nostalgia. I had so much fun playing this game as a younger kid in the back room of my grandparents' flat. This game does have a variant on the NES and the Game Boy. I've never played them, but it's also one of two Addams Family games on the Super Nintendo, but I've only played this one. I haven't played the other one. I don't own the other one either, but apparently this is the more difficult of the two. It's probably the most fun as well. There are other horror games out there that I have really enjoyed, but I haven't really played. Like, in some instances, second-hand fun, if you can call it that. Like, for example, I'll give you one game. So, early days, the PS1, so let's rewind back to the 90s. The PS1 had not long just come out. We had the demo discs, and I'd spend hours and hours playing demo discs. But one game, Nightmare Creatures, I would not play unless the light was on and I was with my mates, because you play that in the dark. The draw distances, and you can hear the monsters in the background behind the draw distance. It's just dark, it's pitch black, and you can just hear the moans and groans. That petrified me as a child. But I haven't played it any other way. It's only been on that demo disc. I've never owned the full game. It's quite pricey now, so I'm probably not going to buy it, but still, good memories, even though I was petrified of it. Silent Hill 2, 3 and 4. Now, I've played these games in part. Hear me out. At the time, I watched a friend play through these games, and every time a jump scare would happen and she'd fill her pants or a scary part was coming up, I had the controller launched on my head basically to progress past that part so she could continue with the story as it died down. But it was funny as hell watching someone on edge play a video game in real life. It was like ancient day Twitch. I also watched her play through the snooze fest that is Kingdom Hearts. Resident Evil 1 on the PS1. I didn't play this one. I watched my brother play it from time to time. I remember being in bed like ready for school the next day and he'd be up playing it, but I was like, I don't want to watch this, it's a bit scary, so I turned away. But a few years later it came out on the GameCube with its ultra realistic graphics for the remake. And I did play through it, but I have two standout memories from playing this version of it. Basically shit me up back then, and it was, as it's a puzzle game as well, you're going backwards and forwards between the same rooms and same corridors. There's this one corridor you're going down and the windows rattle every time you go down. It's like it's teasing. But then as you're progressing through it, you go back down through the same corridor and then zombie dogs like smash through the window. I just remember the first time that happening, jumping out of my skin. Second memory, going through that game, obviously you're meeting the first zombie and the first sort of zombies that are just slow and lethargic. You got some time to figure out your strategy or aim your gun, because you can't run and shoot, don't forget. But I always remember meeting Crimson Head zombies for the first time, and I always remember going into this room and you're used to hearing slow footsteps coming at you. But I just remember the first time the footsteps started running at me. I just got so much anxiety, I think I just paused the game. But satisfying to kill them when you stick grenades in their mouth and such. But I just remember that as being one of them standout memories playing that game. One last game before I sign off, and this isn't really an honourable mention, it was played to death by me, but I always associate it with like Halloween time as the days get darker, and I think that's because like during my college years, me and my buddy Sean, in the summertime we'd be out and about, but as the days got colder we'd find ourselves at each other's houses playing games, and we were regular players of Capcom vs SNK 2. It's coming back out next year, by the way, so me and Sean are about to throw down on stream, and Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks. It is kind of like a horror, gory, you know, Mortal Kombat's themes like. It's horrible, but definitely associated with this time of year. If any game deserves a remake or remaster, it's got to be Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks. And while we're on the subject, let's be having SSX Tricky, SSX 3, Burnout 2, Burnout 3, Tenchu Wrath of Heaven, Getaway Black Monday, and of course thank you for watching me waffle on about nonsense. Again, I will probably catch you in the next video, which will probably be Christmas time, so bring on the top 10 games. It might not even be 10 games, but I'll catch you in whatever video I might make next.